Yes, it's Tales from the Jails. My name is John G. Sutton. I'm going to tell you a strange story today about a hanging at Strangeways prison. The year was 1932. It was March, and a young girl called Annie Farnworth went to school, 6 years of age, and didn't return. She lived in a place called Darwin, which is a small northern mill town close to the city of Blackburn. Big place, Blackburn. Darwin had about 30,000 residents at the time. Year 1932. And in the morning she went to school and was seen at school, but at lunchtime she went out at lunchtime. Her habit was to go home. She lived on a place called K Street, which still stands to this day. K Street. Uh, resided on a house in K Street, which was a typical Victorian terrace. You can still see the houses today. K Street in Darwin. And she went to school and disappeared. And around about 4 or 5 o'clock, her parents, mother and father, reported her missing to the police, as she hadn't been seen. They understood that she'd been at school all day, but apparently when they checked with the headmistress, Annie had been there in the morning, but at dinner time she left, which was her usual practice, to go home. But she didn't go home. She disappeared. She never went back in the afternoon. Quite a considerable search of the area was set up. Sunnyhurst Woods, I believe, was searched, and all the streets. And at the time, of course, the 1930s, it was a relatively close-knit community, and the people were looking for Annie. And then a child came forward some days later, and reported that she'd seen the little girl at the fish and chip shop ordering tripe and chips. Tripe, you know what tripe is? It's the stomach of a cow, and they usually treated it with vinegar and pepper, yeah, and salt, and served it as a delicacy with chips, sold in fish and chip shops. They'd seen her at the fish and chip shop ordering chips and tripe, and they hadn't seen her after that, but they recognised a mug that she had with her as belonging to somebody who lived on K Street, a few doors down from where Annie Farnworth and her family lived. And so the police went to interview the occupant of this house, who was a young man who was 18 at the time, called Charles Cowle, who initially gave the story that basically he'd asked Annie to run an errand for him to the fish and chip shop, and when she brought his tripe and chips back, he'd given her a few chips and she'd gone on her way. The police were very suspicious of this account because when they checked the records, they saw that Charles Cowle, at the age of 9, had seriously injured a younger child of about 2 or 3, by hitting them with a brick. And for that offence, he'd been sentenced to Borstal, and that's where he'd done his, where he was at school. So they were suspicious that this boy had a previous history of injuring children. So when the police constables went back and reported this to their duty inspector, and the duty inspector and the duty sergeant went to see Charles Cowle. During their interview, they decided that it was only reasonable to search the premises, and when they searched the premises, upstairs under the main bed was a tin chest. When they opened that, in there was the body of Annie Farnworth, who had been seriously molested, sexually molested. She was naked from the waist down. Her genitals were covered in blood and seriously damaged. Her neck was still bearing the marks. She'd had a rope fastened round her neck, and she'd been strangled and murdered. And Charles Cowle was arrested for this. Annie Farnworth was 6 years old when she was murdered by Charles Cowle, and he was 18. It was the argument of the defence solicitors, the defence counsel, in the case of Charles Cowle, that he was of unsound mind. They based their arguments on the fact that both his grandparents had died in an asylum for the insane, and that there was a record of insanity in his family. But the psychiatrist found that whilst he was mentally subnormal, he wasn't criminally insane. He wasn't insane. The jury in the trial came back with a verdict of guilty. He was tried at the Manchester Crown Court, or Manchester Assizes as they were then known, and the judge, Mr. Justice Humphreys, I believe his name was, sentenced Charles Cowle to death. You know, the black cap and all that. He was apparently untroubled by this, probably due to his lack of reasoning power, because he was intellectually challenged, shall we say. He didn't realise fully what was happening. But he quickly was relieved of that misconception, because on the 18th of May 1932, just 3 months after the murder of Annie Farnworth, he was taken from the condemned cell on B Wing and hung by his neck until he was dead. The hangman would be James Ellis, and James Ellis's ghost still walks the landings of Strangeways Prison. I know, I've seen that ghost. I sincerely hope you enjoyed today's Tales from the Jails, a little glance back at history. But the body of Charles Cowle would have been interred inside the walls of Strangeways Prison, right at the top. So if you look through the gates of Strangeways Prison, you go in through the big old oak and iron gates on Southall Street, turn right as you go through, up to the top on the right hand side. That's where they buried the executed inmates, because they were to be interred in unhallowed ground. And that is today's Tales from the Jails. Thank you.